This is the Moshpit Backstage podcast for punk, metal, and rock interviews and segments.
Hey, it's Ben from Bridgeburner here, and you are listening to Mosh on Sin.
Ben Reid is the vocalist for New Zealand band Bridgeburner, who'll be releasing their debut full-length, Null Apostle, on May 31st. Ben, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem, very welcome.
Now, let's start really back at the beginning. When did the band form?
It would have been back in 2015. I was living in Japan at the time, and the guitarist Josh, who I've known for many years, when I started thinking about moving back to New Zealand, I wanted to get a band going, and I'd been itching to do a sort of dirty D-beat band for a while, so sent him a message and he was keen. And then when I got back, we met up, got a couple more members, and then put together the Mantras of Self-Loathing 7-inch pretty quickly, and it's just gone from there.
Where did the name come from?
The name is all Josh's. He's, we've all had some tough times in his life, and it's a name that he's had kicking around for a long time. And when we started writing and coming up with the material that ended up on Mantras, he was like, this project needs to be called Bridgeburner, and so we just went with it.
So after your EP, when did you start working on this new album?
This new album has actually been a long time coming. We sort of started writing straight away. We wrote quite a few songs and then sort of whittled it down a little bit. But yeah, the material was sort of been refining it live for quite some time. And the album's actually been recorded and finished for about 9 months. It's just been, real life gets in the way of doing band stuff, and it never goes as quickly as you'd like. But yeah, we're very stoked that it's finally going to see the light of day.
In terms of playing stuff live, are you looking for feedback, sort of audience feedback, how it goes down? What's the sort of thinking behind playing stuff live before it's released on an album?
No, not at all. It's I guess more about getting more comfortable with the material, maybe figuring out if something's lacking. But yeah, it's really more about sort of getting the songs into our DNA, so when it comes time to record, we can just concentrate on performance and getting a good, honest performance rather than having to sort of battle trying to track the songs. But yeah, I guess for us, we're constantly writing, and so we don't really want to sort of just sit on a bunch of material. As we write new songs, we put them in the set, change songs up, and it's just I guess it's just a good way to sort of come to grips with the material and decide where we want to head next. Because Bridgeburner is definitely a band that has sort of a musical progression and heading in stranger directions, and the more we write and the more we play, I guess the more we're figuring that out,
For you guys, what's the process of writing like? How do you go from having no song to an idea to eventually the song being kind of fully formed?
Well, Josh, our guitarist, is the main songwriter, and what usually happens is he'll put together the bones of a song, then bring it to practice, and the drummer and bass player will learn the material. They'll start constructing the song, playing through the song, and then we'll sort of tweak. The rest of us will throw in ideas, and then once it's fairly solid, then I'll write some lyrics, do the arrangements, and then we kind of, once it's all together, sort of, I guess, decide whether we're happy with it or not. But yeah, it's very much a sort of a set process. We'll probably try more collaborative writing in the future, seeing as we all have quite diverse tastes when it comes to extreme music. But yeah, thus far it's mainly worked that way.
For you, writing the lyrics, the vocals, how do you approach that?
To be honest, I'm always writing, and I've been doing singing in bands for nearly half my life, and it's just a completely like a part of me. Like it's a cathartic process, because I write about the things that affect me on a daily basis, and it's generally negative stuff. So the things that affect me negatively, and it's a way of sort of channeling that and using it for something that I can be proud of, and I guess whatever's troubling me at the time generally winds its way into my lyrics. I tend to write very metaphorically, so it's wrapped up in a lot of layers, but essentially the writing process is, I will decide what I want to write about, and then do a rough draft of lyrics, and then go through and, while trying to arrange it, do a few tweaks and changes. But yeah, it's very much I don't know, I've been writing most of my life, so it's just one way to channel that writing.
In terms of your vocals, like, I don't know, it's always sort of difficult for me sometimes when I come to a new band. It's sort of trying to get a real feel for the band, get a real understanding of what's going on. With this release, were you sort of switching up the vocals and more, trying out some different stuff?
No, not really. I mean, to be honest, I've apart from the first few hardcore and grindcore bands I was in many years ago, I've always sort of enjoyed trying out my voice and using different voices, lower vocals and screaming and yelling, whatever suits the line or suits the mood of that particular riff. So maybe I've pushed it a little bit more, but I've sort of always enjoyed exploring different textures with my voice, just like a guitarist isn't only going to just sit there on the E string, it's I enjoy sort of trying to make my vocals interesting and expressive,
Now, in terms of other vocalists, you had 2 guest vocalists on the album. What is it like that you sort of go, when does it happen you think we should have some other people besides yourself doing vocals on particular tracks? And then how do you go about deciding who's actually going to be doing that on the album?
I've always been a fan of guest vocal slots. When I have a favorite album and there's a guest vocalist on a song, and they give a different perspective, or having a different voice, I think it's quite a cool color you can add to your album. So going into it, I really wanted to ask Talia Williams from Dial and Human Resource. Human Resource are an amazing New Zealand band that everyone should check out. We've been playing in bands that have played shows together for the last decade and a half. And I've always loved her voice and her performance and really enjoyed her lyrics. So I wanted to ask her specifically to sing on a track. And then Josh's old band Graves toured with an Australian hardcore band called Outright. And he became friends with Jelena, the vocalist. And he suggested asking her to sing on a song. And we had this track, Kill Hauler, that I liked, but there was something that I felt it was kind of lacking. So when Josh suggested asking Jelena, I sent her the lyrics in the track and said, "Hey, how do you feel about this?" And yeah, she absolutely killed it. Like the aggression in her vocals puts mine to shame. So yeah, super stoked with both how both those guest spots came out.
In terms of the sort of album, sort of more broadly, I was sort of interested to, I wouldn't call it pattern, but you start off with the opening track. It's a lot slower than you proceed into sort of middle of the album. It's a sort of more heavier, more sort of, I don't know if you call them aggressive tracks. And then you sort of go out again and you've got sort of a mix between songs that sort of mix it up a little bit. Could you talk a little bit about sort of those 2 different aspects, the kind of very flat out aggressive kind of in your face stuff, and then the more slower, more atmospheric kind of stuff that's sort of pronounced your album?
We've got quite diverse taste when it comes to heavy and extreme music. And so even though we originally started out as sort of just a D-beat band, there's a lot of other elements that we wanted to include. And we definitely didn't want to sit down and write a particular style of song times 8 or times 10 to put on the album. We kind of just wrote whatever felt right, and the very first song that we wrote for this album was the opening track, which is obviously like the slowest song on the album. And then we just went from there. And because we listen to stuff from, late 90s, early 2000s, sort of hardcore like Botch, but, the favorite band of our guitarist is Godflesh. And then we listen to lots of, extreme stuff and atmospheric black metal. And we just really didn't want to be limited in the scope of the type of riffs or the type of songs we could craft. So when Josh brought these songs in and we started tweaking them, we just wanted to make sure that it sounded like it was still us, and as long as it did, we weren't really too concerned with the pace or the style of riffing. So I guess that's why you've got songs like The Blood Easily Follows, Chased Up by the Blood Never Lies, which are very, very different stylistically, but they're still very much Bridgeburner,
That's interesting. It's always fascinating how there's like this sort of quality to bands that even if they're doing tracks which, when you put it on paper, kind of seem like complete opposite, they're still sort of clearly the same band, and anyone could really tell that they were.
Yeah, and I think as long as there's some common elements, like obviously the style of vocals shape a song a lot, and guitar tone and that type of thing, you can still be extremely diverse and it still be coherent on the same album, And as we're all fans of like a lot of heavy music, the most interesting albums are the ones that aren't the same note repeated. It's the albums that do have a hell of a lot of dynamics and a lot of variety that, keeps you guessing and keeps you interested in this linear songwriting rather than, there's a lot of bands that do quite well that are really just one-trick ponies, and that's, I don't know, I'm kind of a bit older now, and I've been playing in bands for a long time, and I've done that, and I want to make music that I'd be interested in listening to, So it's really important to us that we create music that sort of scratches our itch, so to speak, and because we've got very diverse tastes, it's just how it's come out.
Like in terms of, you mentioned just then about sort of getting older, sort of wanting to kind of diversify, have more variance in the music, and then you spoke earlier about wanting to work on sort of more collaborative style, want to expand. Like, do you guys have any feel about where you want to head next? Is there anything like, we want to include this element, or that would be really cool if we had a song which, I don't know, whatever. Is there any feeling in the band about those kind of things?
Yeah, absolutely. We've definitely discussed that because, like I said, this album's been done for a little while now. We've already started pulling material, and we essentially just want it to be more interesting, weirder, more unorthodox, pulling reference and influence from things that sit outside of the extreme metal niche. I mean, I'm not saying that we're going to suddenly break into like a country song, but we just really want Bridgeburner to be something a bit different. I mean, obviously all bands probably say that, but that because there's such a saturation of heavy bands, we want to be adding something worthwhile to the musical conversation, So I think that then the future will probably hold stranger, more unorthodox material than on Null Apostle. How that ends up, I've really got no idea at this stage, but we're just definitely excited to try some new things and I guess just to make music that we'd find interesting as music fans ourselves.
Now, this might be kind of like a too theoretical question. It's one of those things that I think about and I don't really have a good answer. But like a lot of bands these days, and are interested for good reason in trying to be different and trying to include different elements, not necessarily being all metal, doing lots of different stuff. Whereas the great bands of like the 80s in particular, all seem to sort of often be doing kind of a more sort of straight metal. Do you have any thoughts about like what do you reckon's changed over the time that means that like people can't just do straight metal and it still have necessarily the same appeal to people? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think it's because that, you know, that path has been trodden. So, bands like Slayer and Metallica have already done that and put that on the map. So it's, and to this day, you still have bands that are very much like carrying that torch, but it's just not as exciting as it once was because, that it's been done a million times and it's been done probably better than anyone else will ever do it. So I guess in terms of the way heavy music has evolved, it's gotten heavier and more extreme, and then it got to the point where it was kind of at the most extreme it could be in terms of, technical death metal in terms of pushing human performance, being able to play at the top speed, and that's kind of been done. And now I think people are just, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot more atmosphere and a lot more, in terms of sort of angry and upsetting music, there's a lot more vibe seems to be more important now. So I just feel that with, with all the bands that were really big in the 80s and the styles that were big, it's already been done so well that, people want to listen to something new. Like, you can still chuck on your Slayer records, but in terms of music that's being put out, people don't want to hear regurgitation of what was already happening like 20 or 30 years ago. They want something new. They want to feel something new.
It's funny, I've interviewed a lot of bands from Art As Catharsis, the label you guys are on.
Yeah.
A lot of bands, because Lachlan puts out a lot of great stuff, and I'm a very big fan of it.
Yeah.
How'd you guys get involved with Art As Catharsis? I've never sort of asked any of the bands. I was just sort of the idea sort of popped into my head.
To be honest, Art As Catharsis were the first label we approached, and it was essentially because his band roster is very curated. He's not, his label isn't just, okay, we do technical death metal bands and so we just sign a million technical death metal bands. It doesn't really matter what genre it is, as long as there's something sincere and there's something real about it and something that strikes a chord with him, he's interested in helping out, and that's what we wanted in the label. Someone that saw the value in what we're doing and weren't just like, okay, yeah, you sound like band X, sure, we sign, bands of that style. And he's released some fantastic records over the years, and it's, if you look at on the release roster, like the releases were sandwiched between, they're completely not metal, they're often completely different tangents, and I find that really, rather than sort of being stuck in one genre, he just wants to put out music that's good to him, and music that makes him feel something or something that resonates with him. And yeah, he's just been fantastic to deal with from the get-go, and we definitely couldn't be happier. It's perfect for a band like us.
I think you're the first New Zealand band I've interviewed. I really need to interview a lot more New Zealand bands because you've got some really great music coming out of there. What is the scene like in New Zealand in terms of heavy music?
To be honest, like I've been involved in the sort of metal and hardcore scenes over here for almost two decades, and it is constantly an ebb and flow. There are times where there's shows every weekend. We're based in Auckland, which is the biggest city in New Zealand. There's times where there's just like it's an abundance of shows and amazing bands completely crushing it, and then it sort of dries up a bit and gets a bit quiet, and then it sort of comes back. But I think it's just the way it always is with, I guess, generations moving on. People get a bit older, start having kids, priorities shift, and then young people sort of get involved in the music scene and move up to replenish the bands and the audience, you know. So it's just it's a constant sort of ebb and flow of popularity. It's a bit tough in terms of venues. We've lost a lot of good venues. It sounds like it's happening in Sydney as well. It actually sounds like it's happening in a lot of places down in our part of the world. But we recently lost the King's Arms, which was the most iconic music venue here, and one of the only music venues that was perfect for heavy music shows and international artists. And yeah, it's just been a tremendous loss. So it's a bit quiet at the moment, and there's not a real lot of choice when it comes to venues. We're hoping someone's going to pick up the torch and create something. But yeah.
Couple last questions about you, sort of personally. Just doing sort of the research, limited research that you sort of can do on like metal, heavy bands. Did you do vocals for a Mexican band? Did I read that correctly? Is that...
Yeah. I'm in a band called Punished, who are based in Mexico, and that came about because maybe about 10 years ago there was a metal forum, international metal forum that I used to post on a lot, and I made a few friends that then when things shifted to Facebook, we kept in touch. And my friend Antonio had a new project on the go, and he hit me up and said, "Hey, how do you feel about doing vocals for this album?" And so I was like, "Yeah, for sure," because music was fantastic. He's a ridiculous guitarist and songwriter, and yeah, that ended up happening. And just with the way modern technology is, you know, it's perfectly feasible to do a band with members spread all around the world. Like it's great.
When did you first start listening to heavy music?
That would have been in the mid '90s. I was really into Nirvana and Green Day and bands like that. And then my first proper girlfriend introduced me to a bunch of new metal, so bands like Korn, when Korn first came out, and introduced me to Slayer and Fear Factory, and it just completely like blew my mind. You know, I couldn't really make sense of I don't know what it made me feel. You know, obviously I was an angsty teenager, and so it just really resonated with me. Then one day someone gave me Cannibal Corpse Vile on cassette, and that was it. And then I was just from then on just sort of delved into heavy music.
It's funny, Cannibal Corpse was my sort of first like crazy like at the time it's just very odd to listen to death metal because it doesn't really make any sense and you're not sure what the hell's going on.
It doesn't. Absolutely. I remember laughing out loud when I first heard it, because I was just like, what's with those vocals? And you know, it's one of those things where I was just like enamored by it because I didn't understand it, so I just listened to it more and more until I was like, okay, yeah, this is the best. But yeah, when you first hear it, it's just like, is this music? You know.
When did you first start doing vocals?
That would have been maybe 1999, possibly. It was when I first started getting into hardcore, because I was really into, I guess, sort of basic entry-level death metal, and then a bunch of stuff like Machine Head and Fear Factory and Slayer and all that. And then I had an ad up in a music store to start a band, and I got a call and went for an audition. But this was on guitar. Went for an audition to play with this band, and they were playing sort of metalcore kind of stuff, and I'd never heard it. And this is back before metalcore's been like completely rinsed to death. But you know, I just the breakdowns with Slayer riffs. I was just like, wow, okay, I've got to be in this band. And they gave me a bunch of tapes, including Vision of Disorder, self-titled, and I totally fell in love with that album. And I was like, I want to be able to make these noises that Tim Williams is making. So I just used to drive around in my old car, blasting this Vision of Disorder album, trying to emulate Tim Williams' voice until I could start to do it, and then that was it. And sort of been doing vocals in bands ever since, because I realised I'm not much of a musician.
Final question. I know it can be a little bit hard sometimes, but what are your favourite albums or artists?
Ooh, okay. That is always a tough one. In terms of heavy, upsetting music, there's a couple of bands that definitely stand out. Primitive Man, an artist on Relapse, I absolutely love. It's just complete oral misery. Like it's the definition of miserable, crushing music. I also absolutely love Cult Leader, who I guess play, again, it's really upsetting music, but it's a lot faster than Primitive Man. What else? Listen to so much. Also been listening to a lot of Gunship lately, which is like 80s synthwave stuff. So when you start getting older, your tastes diversify a bit, and now I listen to all and sundry, but I guess heavy, extreme music will always have a special place in my heart,
Bridgeburner, they'll be releasing Null Apostle on May 31st. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thanks for listening to the Moshpit Backstage podcast. You can subscribe to us on iTunes and Omni. To find out more about the show, go to www.syn.org.au/moshpit. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/moshpitonsin, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at moshpitsin. The regular Moshpit radio show broadcasts punk, rock and metal tunes and interviews every Thursday nights on Sin 9.7 on FM and digital radios. Listeners outside of Melbourne, Australia can stream Sin 9.7 online at www.syn.org.au. Thanks to Vintage Ruin for the music.
Hi, this is Tomato from Flash Gun Apocalypse.
Hi, I'm Enid from Girls School.
I am Phoebe Pinnock from Heaven the Axe.
Hey, this is Gary Oldmead of the Misfits.
Hey, this is Kat Sproul from Horizon's Edge, and you're listening to the Moshpit on Sin FM.
Hi, this is Einar from Leopard.
Hi, I'm Virginia Lilly from the band Lily.
This is Raul from 1349.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ali from Beaverhead.
Hey, everybody, this is Charlie Benante with Anthrax, and you are listening to the Moshpit on Sin.